Hello viewers, well you join me again in Holland where I'm with a counsellor, an exJW counsellor, Francis Peters, who has some experience with dealing with people who are exiting cults. Francis, you're actually an ex-Jehovah's Witness yourself, aren't you?
Yes.
But you've managed to educate yourself and train yourself to be able to help other people who are in the exiting process.
Yes.
So.
I left the organization when I was in my mid-40s.
Right.
And I got back to school when I was 49.
Right. So that's good, isn't it? So I think a lot of people when they leave the organisation having forsaken higher education,
yes,
they can maybe leave in later years and think, oh well, that ship has sailed, there's no point trying to better myself with training. But you would probably advocate the opposite, would you?
Yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
because I felt I needed counselling skills,
Yeah.
to be able to help others. So I needed to go back to school and learn these skills.
And it's quite a specific field as well, isn't it? Because would it be fair to say that there's obviously lots of very clever and well-trained psychologists and counsellors, but there's very few who fully understand the problems with cults. That's been my experience. I don't know whether you would agree with that.
A lot of clients that come to me, and I experienced it myself,
Yeah.
is that it's very hard to explain what happened to you. If somebody didn't live it, so hasn't gone through the same. So it does help when somebody has his own experience to fall back on, but it's also, people can be very good at what they do, so psychologists and psychiatrists can be very good in their work, but they just, many of them, I don't say all,
No.
but many of them don't understand where an ex-cult member is coming from.
Right.
So they don't understand this, and I say it often, this learned helplessness that somebody is experiencing when he's just coming out of a cult.
Sure.
So it's a period of a moment of confusion, and it's also very hard for an ex-cult member to explain what's happened to him. So he's in the middle of that confusion, not being able to express himself or being able to explain exactly what happened to him, but somebody who does have experience with what happens to someone can give them exactly what they need to be able to express themselves, to be able to understand their own situation and what they are going through, and help them to get really ground themselves again and see what they can do, and then they can do the work which many psychiatrists do,
Right.
and make people feel safe, and then helping them to take their own responsibility and making their own choices.
Sure. So it's a case of, in a way, prioritising.
Yes.
You know, what's most important in the journey, because you know lots of people, regardless of whether they've been in cults or not, have psychological issues.
Yes.
But if a psychotherapist or a counsellor hasn't had direct experience themselves, they could perhaps maybe even subconsciously minimise what that cult victim's been through.
Or they don't understand them. They actually are making them a victim again.
Sure.
By not acknowledging what the cult has done to them.
Yeah.
And they make it their responsibility and say, well, you could have gone out of this cult, or the door was open, why didn't you leave? But it's not about that. It's about mind control, about undue influence, and that's a part that many psychiatrists or psychologists just don't understand.
So, trying to remedy this, I know that yourself and, is it Julie Jenkinson and Stephen Hassan are trying to kind of raise more awareness of the dynamics of undue influence and mind control, not just in the public in general, but particularly among psychotherapists. Is that like a work that you believe quite strongly in?
Yes, by giving training to people who already are good psychologists and psychiatrists, or people who work as even a police officer who has to deal with people coming to them and telling them about the cult they were in, or the harm that was done to them, and how to understand, so the police officer could understand him and be open to what they're saying to them, taking them seriously. It's very important that they understand the cult dynamics and they understand what undue influence is about. And it's not about being guilty of being too gullible, or
not being too stupid,
yes,
or
I was not intelligent enough. And so it's not about guilt.
No.
It's about undue influence.
Sure.
And it is very important, because people who were once part of a cult don't often understand themselves what happened to them, so they didn't understand, many of them don't understand what that undue influence happened to them and what impact it did have.
Yeah.
So that's very important, this acknowledgement of the whole process.
Help people feel validated, I suppose.
Yes.
Probably we should back up a little bit, because maybe viewers might be wondering what your story is, what led you to the conclusion that you were in a cult. Are you able to say kind of what brought you to that stage and what that was like for you?
I was born and raised in the organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was really a true believer. So I was doing all the things that everybody expected of me, and I thought Jehovah God was asking from me. So pioneering, being baptized at 15, even started to learn Turkish when I was 19. And
to serve where the need is greater.
Yes,
yeah.
and to be able to preach, to be the missionary in your own country. And we married young. I was 20 when we were married, and we would just our routine was completely in the organization, and all our friends, all the people we really had a relationship with, were all from the organization. So a complete social network, like so many in the organization, who are really completely dedicated to the goal of preaching. We were for 100% totally devoted to the cause, and we were after we became parents. We were almost 11 years married, and we got children, and then our lives were upside down. Then we started to think about certain things that we never thought about before.
Was it because you were parents that you thought about things a bit more deeply?
Yes, it had a total different perception, thinking about a blood transfusion. So at first we just accepted certain things, and now that wasn't enough. We just wanted to understand completely what it was all about, because it would be a decision for life and death. And when you're young, everything is okay, it will never happen to me, but once you get children,
you have the added responsibility.
So you feel the responsibility heavily. But not only that, it's things that happened with 1994, when there was the 1914 issue.
The generation teaching.
Generation teaching, and so things like that happened. It just added up, and in the end, we couldn't let it go. We just had to understand what it was all about. So instead of just going into the routine and just go on, and we started to think, wait a minute, we have to really understand this, because it doesn't feel right.
No.
And then we started to investigate, like what we would say to going from door to door and saying to people, you have to investigate your own religion. So we have to do it ourselves, and really. Or we will be more convinced that it is the truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Or it's time for us to understand that something has to happen. And then the NGO issue.
The United Nations.
Yes,
Yeah.
the NGO issue started, and then what was the last straw, or the last drop, was the child abuse affair, what happened in the early 2000s.
Right.
And that was for us the limit.
Because it was the exposure. I know, you know, lots of exJWs watching this who have maybe woken up in recent years will think that child abuse has always been an issue, and in many ways it has, but it's only really since maybe 2002 when you had those documentaries that came out. There was the BBC Suffer the Children, and there was also the Dateline documentary in America.
Yes.
They both happened in the same year, and that's when things really started to explode, wasn't it?
And we saw one of these documentaries, and it just, all the little doubts and all this criticism we did have, it just came together, and we said, well, we cannot accept this any longer. So we have to know what we'll do. And I said, if this is really true, and I'll dive into it, then I cannot stay in this organization any longer, because it just goes against everything what I feel is right.
And have you and your husband suffered shunning as a result of making this decision?
Yes, because we were always very cooperative. We were always going for it. We were very active in the middle of the organization. And then we started to have really, we asked hard questions.
Yeah.
And then as soon as we did that, then certain privileges, what they call, of course, privileges, were taken away from my husband. So he was not allowed to pray in front of the congregation. The book study was no longer in our house. There were no longer meetings to go from door to door. So things like that, and they started to that our children were not allowed to play with the children of other brothers and sisters in the congregation. So it was obvious that we were not allowed to ask critical questions, but that made us more alert, because we thought, why are they acting so strange towards a legitimate question about a thing that's really upsetting us? So it helped us to become more aware of there's something really wrong here. So it actually, on one side, it did help us.
In a way, the ridiculous behaviour only reinforces that it was the right decision.
Yes, and the fear we saw in the eyes of let's say, the rank and file brothers and sisters. We were astonished. Why are they so scared? So it made us more alert.
So probably a lot of viewers watching this channel will be seizing on the fact that here we have an ex-Jehovah's Witness who's also had training as a counsellor, and probably one of the questions will be, well, what practical knowledge do you have regarding helping to wake up indoctrinated family members? Do you have any words of advice on maybe a strategic approach for any viewers that have got like friends and family who are indoctrinated witnesses, how to get through to them?
I always actually recommend not be too confrontational. So it's not a good idea to explain why the biblical convictions.
Get into theological debates.
Debate is the worst thing you can do, because then you push them right into this, I call this cult identity, this group identity, and they'll become even more stronger because of it, because they feel they have to defend the organization and very passionate about it. But it's the best way to really try to reach the person themselves. So to talk about, ask curious questions. So what I often suggest is that people would ask about, is it enough to just worship Jehovah and the organization, or of Jehovah and the Bible,
Right, or does the
without the organization,
yeah.
or just to ask them questions about the things that are really normal to them, but to make them
start
thinking about if this wouldn't be the truth, would this still be Jehovah, would they still be okay? So is or if there's questions, so I ask questions. I remember about the slave, and there was a congregation district convention about submitting ourselves to the slave, and said, but is submitting to the slave the same as submitting to Jehovah? And asked them to explain. Extensively, ask them to explain how should I understand this, and by asking them to explain, some who are already a bit doubtful about things will just hear themselves talk.
That's a good point, because I think sometimes the secret of unlocking the indoctrination lies in the indoctrination itself. Because when you really start to think about what witnesses are describing and start to really go into the details of it and the small print, that's when all the skeletons start to come out, when you really start thinking about it. So. And another thing that I've been trying to encourage people to do, just a very simple technique, is to compare cults. Because there's some really fantastic documentaries out now about for example, there's a Louis Theroux documentaries on the Westboro Baptist Church which helped Diana to wake up. She still credits them as helping her kind of follow BL. There's also the Going Clear documentary about Scientology.
It's very good, yes.
There's Meet the Mormons, the Channel 4 documentary about the Mormons. So are these effective ways, do you think, of helping witnesses to...
Yeah, I can remember, even while I was still in the congregation, I remember that I saw a documentary about a Catholic man and wife, a couple, a Catholic couple, who really, they sold everything they had just to live in Mexico City and help poor people or homeless people, and to make a home for them, and especially the young children, to try and invite them to come to live with them without, so they will be taken care of. And I was so moved by what they did, and I was shocked that when I tried to tell about what happened, and I saw a documentary, I was so moved by it, what this couple did, and there was no reaction of the brothers and sisters. They were enthusiastic about it because they were not Jehovah's Witnesses. And
even though it was the same thing.
Yes, and I said, well, this is purely love, and how can you say that somebody who has made such huge sacrifices, they have to be acknowledged as something that's really purely out of love. There's no agenda, no own agenda, and I was moved by it, and also I was confused by it, because I thought, if people without being in the organization are capable of such love, why should there only be Jehovah's Witnesses acknowledged as true Christians? So things like that really confused me.
That's an interesting point, because I was talking about comparisons in terms of identifying the negative attributes. But what you're describing there is finding the positive attributes.
Yes.
Because there's so many areas in which Jehovah's Witnesses claim that they must be the only true religion because they're doing X, Y, and Z. But when you start to look at other religions, you notice that they all have these claims, or could make these claims. For example, I think I worked out once that Roman Catholics are in fact in more countries than Jehovah's Witnesses. I think I tabulated it once and found it fascinating. these are claims that Jehovah's Witnesses make for themselves, but you can actually find parts of them in other religions. Yeah.
And preaching in prisons.
Yeah.
Or people stopping using drugs or
relief work
or
and
other bad habits, say, or unhealthy habits.
Yeah.
Not just Jehovah's Witnesses.
Yeah.
Why people stop using them. So if it's God's Spirit that helps them stopping such behavior, then outside of Jehovah's Witnesses, the same help is offered. So is that also from God?
Exactly.
So those were the questions that really affected me.
Affected you, yeah. And perhaps the final question would be, because there'll be lots of people watching this who are also thinking, well, sorry, I'm awake. I know it's false. I know that it's not God's one true religion, and I've been awake for some time, but I'm still struggling with these fears and doubts and uncertainties. I still have these flashbacks. What advice would you have for people in that kind of situation?
Could you specify a bit more?
You could be completely aware of the fact that it's a cult and that it has harmful practices and it can't possibly be God's one true organisation. But because of the lifetime of indoctrination, you can still find yourself having these doubts. Have I made the right decision? Are they in fact the governing body and I'm just missing something? Is what I'm doing correct? And just doubting yourself.
Yeah.
What advice would you have for people in that situation?
Now, I think at that point it could be very helpful to first give attention to the needs you have. Because if somebody is still in this, because I find that in a very confusing state. So someone is really still affected by the fear and the feelings of guilt and feelings
self-loathing,
of obligation. So this emotional blackmail, even when you're out of the group, it's still affecting you. So the emotional blackmail starting to these convictions make you feel guilty, and all these indoctrinations are still with you even when you're out of the cult. So to give attention to that underlying fear and the underlying guilt. So what is that about? Is it really true what you're thinking? So it's very important to make people understand that the underlying thought that triggers the fear in itself is not true. So it's the fear that's triggered. Maybe if it's true. Is it? So it's very good to really talk about it extensively, so they get a grip on what's happening and they get a grip on, is this really true? So it's not about the question itself, it's about the feeling it's triggering. So people need attention to understand what this fear is all about.
Because I try and remind people of the 3 R's. Research, research, research.
Yes.
Because I think
psychoeducation helps.
Exactly, because I think that I do encounter ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who say, oh well, I just know it's not true anymore and I've moved on. Which is great, but there are these situations where I think ex-JWs are afraid of doing the research for whatever reason. And as such, they're not equipped for when these doubts and fears come back, because when those doubts and fears come back, you need to be able to almost sit yourself down and say, no, hang on a minute, there's the child abuse, there's the UN scandal, there's Mexico, Malawi, there's shunning, there's the blood transfusion. You need to be able to remind yourself of the reasons why you're taking this decision, I find.
And also the right, so you have the basic rights to criticize and to question. So if you need time to understand what it's all about, then take all the time you need. Because you have the right to understand what's going on before you make a decision.
Exactly. Well, this has been really helpful talking to you. I'm sure there'll be loads of people watching this thinking this is exactly what I needed, because it's one thing to read about it maybe in a Stephen Hassan book, but actually hearing people go through it verbally in that way, and especially someone like yourself who's an exJW and an ex-cult survivor. So thank you so much, Frances, for
You're very welcome.
our conversation, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.